Ladies, gentlemen, and Vault Hunters of all ages, we are right around a week and a half away from the release of Borderlands 4, and with the game closing in, if you are someone who is planning to play it, you're probably spending a fair bit of time thinking about which Vault Hunter you want to play on launch. At least I know I am, but I am also a serious ultaholic, which I realize for people who don't play MMOs is a potentially concerning term, but it just means that I am obsessed with playing every playstyle or class available in the game if I find the gameplay systems in general to be fun. And Borderlands is a series where I historically have done multiple playthroughs just to experience what all the Vault Hunters feel like. So I know, I get you, I understand the difficulty of this choice. And so today, as someone who has watched and read every bit of pre-release information for the game that I could get my grubby little mitts on, I'm going to try and sell you on each Vault Hunter. I'll give you a sort of overview of what their playstyle is going to look like, what their skills are, some gameplay comparisons to try and help you understand how they would feel, and hopefully the way that I describe one of these four Vault Hunters will make them click with your brain in a way where you just know that's going to be the right choice for you, or at least the right first choice, because if you enjoy the game enough, there's again nothing stopping you from a second playthrough on someone new. That said, if you want all of the technical details for each character, information about their skill trees and stuff like that, we do have a video going over all of that as a general overview already on the channel if you want to check it out. But that is sort of statistical and dry and requires interpretation and imagination to think of how it would actually be in proper gameplay. Whereas today is more about talking about the vibe and feel for each of the Vault Hunters, the way each one should feel when you play them, the playstyles that they will mesh with the best in action. Starting off then, let's talk about Vex. Vex is the Siren of Borderlands 4, meaning she's got that beautiful mystical magic on her side. She has a lot of Warlock and Necromancer vibes to compare to some typical fantasy archetypes. She can summon minions to fight alongside her, she can turn into a half-demon, or she can run around with a permanent beast familiar at her side. Her passive trait makes her attuned to elemental weapons, which means that her melee and all of her skills will always match the damage type of the gun that you hold in your hands. If you're holding an incendiary gun, everything would be incendiary damage. And for those wondering, yes, this does actually change the straight up color of her skills too, including the familiar Panther, which adjusts to match whatever element gun type you are holding. Just by this alone, this means that Vex will have a lot of elemental synergy, and if you are someone who likes bringing the right tool for the right job, changing elements based on the enemy that you are fighting or the type of health you're trying to chew through, you will be rewarded for that with Vex more than any other character. And her skill trees have a lot of options that lean into specific elemental types too if you want to do that. Vex's general playstyle, at least with her Dead Ringer minion summoning skill and her Phase Familiar skill, will be letting the minions take the brunt of the attention and using that as a distraction to find the biggest guy around and throw some bullets his way. Dead Ringer is mostly about buffing the minions themselves in various ways, whereas Phase Familiar is much more active. You're controlling the animal intentionally, and a lot of the passives and augments in the skill tree affect both Vex and the Familiar. For the Incarnate skill, it's focused more on Vex herself, and that skill tree has a fair amount of lifesteal options, but the main deal with it is Eldritch Blast as a special fireable offhand attack that regenerates its cooldown when you shoot enemies. So it's the highest pace option for the character, with it being heavily around just keeping constant offense on your enemies from range, with some options in the tree even giving you the option to spend your own health to boost your damage and then regenerate in various ways. So again, very necromancy and warlock coded all around. Next up, let's move on to Rafa the Exo-Soldier. He's probably the easiest to explain and compare, and that's because he fits the general soldier archetype that we have in pretty much every Borderlands game, adjusted just slightly for each one. But he's got a bit of extra flair in a melee direction. He's a soldier locked into permanently wearing an exosuit due to his upbringing. He found his way into an experimental suit by working with TDR's military programs before he ended up running away and took the suit with him. Rafa is going to be a fun one for people who like having high movement speed, as well as guns, lots of guns, big blasty guns, and, well, also melee specifically. And if you like beams, Rafa's got multiple beams. His passive trait is called Overdrive, and it simply makes it so when you activate any of his action skills, you gain movement speed and increased damage from all sources. This effect lasts for the duration of the skill, and then a few seconds afterwards as well. This means regardless of which skill it is, when you hit your skill button, you enter Mega Mode, and you become a menace in varying ways. As well, on top of this, Rafa has some unique interactions with Ordinance through his skill trees, and Ordinance is the new term used for things like rocket launchers and grenades and such, which now, instead of having a limited ammo count like they used to in previous Borderlands games will have their own cooldown, almost like a secondary action skill. That said, his first action skill, Apophis Lance, is essentially an arm cannon by default, but it can be changed into doing things like firing globs of corrosive goo that bounce and split between enemies, or turned into a lightning cannon that is essentially just force lightning coming right out of your arm, or you can even change it into a beam cannon that fires lasers that chain between enemies, which just sounds really cool. It's high-tech, high-powered weaponry attached to your body that works on a timer instead of an ammo count. The second action skill, Peacebreaker Cannons, are functionally very similar, but automatic. When active, these will pop out of your shoulders and just start firing when you do, giving you essentially more guns active at the same time. You can turn them into shotguns that ricochet bullets, or you can turn them into beam weapons, or you can turn them into rocket launchers, and you can even turn it into a turret that places on the ground and then automatically fires at enemies. But no matter what, it's essentially just activating more guns, sort of like Gunzerker mode from Borderlands 2, but a little bit more malleable. Then the third action skill is where things get totally different. Arc Knives. This is a purely melee skill. It puts your guns away and takes out 2 arm blades. You can take advantage of the extra speed from your passive trait while using this, and there are lots of fun ways to augment it in the skill tree too. Like there's an augment that makes it so there is no duration on the ability, but instead it will drain your health. But hitting enemies gives overshield, which means if you are active enough and you are hitting enemies constantly with this ability, you could technically stay in Arc Knives forever and be a properly pure melee build, which is an archetype that I know people love, at least conceptually, so I'm really hoping this turns out to be strong enough to use properly. But if you want a full, proper, fast melee build playstyle, this is probably going to be your best choice by a good margin. Not necessarily your only choice, as all the characters can build into melee in some regard, but this is just a melee build in its purest form. Next up, we've got Amon, the Forgeknight, and I think he's going to have an absolute winning personality. Like what we know about him and his character description just read to me like this will quite possibly be the Vault Hunter with the most memorable dialogue, if that is something you care about. He was raised in a cult that worshipped vault monsters. He ended up seeing everyone he knew killed by a vault monster, and this shaped his entire life's mission to kill as many vault monsters as possible, but he's also referred to as a warrior poet with a warm attitude who often shares stories and advice with his companions. Amon is the Brick of Borderlands 4 for the absolute simplest comparison. He is a big, meaty, beefy guy who is generally intended to be right up in the enemy's business, taking a lot of attention and dealing a lot of damage. He has a massive focus on specifically cryo or ice damage and incendiary or fire damage. He's essentially a Viking whose combat represents the two sides of his own soul in a very technological sense too. The cold exterior hardened by the hardships and the warm inside wanting to help and entertain and spread love. His passive skill is the most complex of any of the Vault Hunters, and it basically just adds an extra function to each of his action skills to make them more involved and more complex and more interesting. His first skill is called Onslaughter. This gives Amon just constant shield regeneration, bonus incendiary damage with guns, and increased movement speed, as well as making his melee a forward lunging rocket punch that does damage in a cone in front of him. And where Rafa gets the super high damage, high speed melee build option, Amon gets the big beefy melee build option where you can just sit in front of an enemy beating on them and trying to out-heal or out-shield the damage that you're taking. But Amon also can't stay in melee permanently with any of his skill tree that we've seen as of this point at least, so that is a consideration if you're looking for melee. His second skill is called Scourge, and this is the most directly tank-like option, as it straight up lets you have a shield in your offhand. The shield will fully absorb projectiles up to a set limit, but that limit is a gauge that you can spend to send out cryo waves by default, or there's other cool ways that you can spend the gauge in the skill tree too. But the idea is that you have massive tankiness from the shield, and you dump the actual bar on offense, and then you can tank even more stuff with the shield. And the special extra function from his passive on this one lets you place a wall on the ground that absorbs enemy projectiles and actually buffs any friendly bullets that go through it, so this can be used as a proper team support in a group too. And just to mention it, as it is another playstyle archetype that I think people would enjoy, there are options in the skill tree for this to let you not only throw the shield, but have it bounce around between your enemies too. Amon's third skill is called Crucible, and this is the one where he throws his axes around, and it's very cool. It almost feels like he's a high-tech Viking. The base version of this is just sort of interesting. It's essentially ranged melee as you throw the axes, and they do melee damage, but when you throw an axe at an enemy, you prime them for detonation. They get a debuff that, when triggered, pops for a load of damage. You pop the debuff with the extra function from the passive trait, or from other methods through the choices that you make in the skill tree, including an axe that bounces between enemies as well, so you can prime a bunch of enemies and then just throw throw a bouncing axe bounce between them, causing them all to make explosions when they get hit, and that just sounds like a whole other awesome playstyle to me too. Or you can take this skill a whole different direction and have it create forged drones that fight the enemies as well, and just have an army of little drones in the shape of weapons that attack your enemies for you. Not to mention the fact that while most of his skills are baseline focused around fire or ice, he also has the ability to transform all of them into a shock damage variation if you prefer the visuals of lightning. He also has a ton of variety just across all of his skills, and I think that he'll probably be a fan favorite pretty quickly. Then finally we have Harlowe, the Gravitar, I'm bad at reading. Harlowe, a former combat scientist, or at least a formerly employed combat scientist. I'm sure she still views herself as a woman of science. She is super positive and enthusiastic, she's incredibly smart, and her entire actual combat kit is based around wacky, incredible, unbelievable tech creations that control the battlefield and decimate her enemies. Harlowe's skills are heavily built around crowd control, locking enemies down, making it hard for them to move, or cutting off areas and making them impossible to move through safely. But of course, that only covers 2 of her skills, as no Vault Hunter is without a damage-focused skill option. As well, as far as damage goes, she has a ton of synergies available with specifically cryo and corrosive element types for anyone who likes the sound of those. Her passive trait is called Entanglement, and anytime that an enemy takes damage from any one of her skills, they get the Entangled debuff. A portion of all damage done by guns or skills to an entangled enemy is shared by all other entangled enemies. So essentially you are creating a chain of damage. You're trying to hit as many enemies with your skills as you can so that your guns and your follow-up skill uses will do even more damage to even more enemies. And this sounds like it should be a lot of fun in the more chaotic, larger scale fights that the game should have. Her Chroma Accelerator skill is essentially a giant wave of deadly energy that you fire out of a like crazy cannon that you generate in front of your face, and it does damage as it passes through enemies and then has a big nasty explosion at the end. And one of the ways that you can augment this skill with the capstones in the skill tree is to turn it into a big nasty bouncy ball that doesn't explode on impact but instead continues to bounce off of surfaces and enemies, creating explosions every time that it bounces. And this is just the bubble of chaos. I love the sound of it. She's got the 0-point skill, which is the one that you will have seen the most from her promotional gameplay, the one where she picks an enemy up in a bubble, puts them in stasis, and then they can't move, then they get slammed down into the ground. The slam itself does splash damage around the target too if there's any enemies near them, and there are plenty of ways to mess with this skill in the skill tree too. But this one is pretty clear. If you like being able to just remove enemies from combat entirely, this is probably the skill that you would want to focus on, and it's visually very cool too. Then her final skill is called Flux Generator, and this is in a lot of ways her support skill option. It creates a sort of field of damage around it when you place it that damages any enemies that are nearby. It can be picked up and moved around, but there are a number of options in the skill tree for this one that make it apply buffs to your allies or overshields, or there's an option that sort of does the opposite, honestly. It boosts the action skill damage for Harlowe based on the amount of allies that are in the current radius. And in theory, I can imagine this one being pretty silly for stuff like a stationary boss that just sort of stays in the radius of damage consistently. But mostly, this is just a sort of hunkering down type skill. The one you use if you want to stay in an area and keep enemies away from it, or if you want to bum rush into a group of enemies and do a lot of damage to them immediately. So to try and sum things up, Vex is a Necromancer or Warlock type who will generally want to stay at range and either use her minions, her Familiar, or her Eldritch Blast to do a lot of the heavy lifting, alongside a strong elemental focus. Rafa is super high-paced, balls-to-the-walls, run and gun style, lots of firepower, and a full-time dedicated melee option if you want to build that way too, or he can build in a way where he can have a turret, which is much more classic sort of soldier archetype in the series. He has tankiness options, but his tankiness comes from staying in the fight, staying active, activating things like kill skills. Amon is more just a default out-of-the-gate tank. He has lots of options for making himself harder to kill. He has a rocket punch, he has a full damage-absorbing shield, and he has throwable melee axes that can cause explosions. And then Harlowe is full tech science-based. Lots of combat control and battlefield tactics at the core of her, and one skill that's just a fun damage nuke just to balance it out too for people who like her personality, but aren't as into the idea of control-style gameplay. That said, One final point I want to make is that these are just some of the playstyles that I see the most synergy for and the comparisons that make the most sense to me immediately. There's nothing saying that you have to play any of the Vault Hunters in any specific way if you don't want to. And so at the end of the day, if one of them has a personality or an aesthetic that just speaks to you personally, you should pick them, play them, make them fun for you by playing them whatever way sounds the most intriguing to you, rather than forcing yourself to fit into the box of their intended playstyle. Especially at the start of the game when everyone's figuring things out, be chaotic and have fun. Those words are the most important advice I can give in life as a whole, honestly. Be chaotic, have fun. That just about does it for today then, everyone. A bit of a talk about the Vault Hunters in less of a mechanical sense and more just a general description of who they are, what they are, how they will act, and how they will both play and feel, rather than just specific systems behind it all. I hope you've enjoyed this then, and importantly, I hope it's helped you make the decision of which one you want to play on launch. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, I'm the conductor of the poop train!
Josh, Cotton, and Harlowe with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.